What follows is a transcription of a journal found in the archives of the Department of Civil Works of the municipality of Braume, in a folder of engineering documents from the period 1750 to 1760, between a survey of the city's eastern drainage channels and a report on the structural integrity of the North Gate's foundations. The folder was catalogued in 1834 as Miscellaneous Technical Documents, Subterranean Infrastructure. The journal was catalogued as one item among the 14 documents in the folder and was listed as Technical Diary, Unknown Hand, approximately 1754. It remained in this catalog entry until a researcher working on the history of 18th-century European public health engineering requested the folder in 2021, and in reading the journal, determined that the unknown hand was that of Pieter van Moorsel, a civil engineer of Dutch origin who had been employed by the city of Braume from 1751 to 1755 on the project of constructing ventilation shafts for the city's subterranean burial infrastructure. The researcher published a brief note on the journal's identification in a specialist journal of the history of civil engineering in 2022. The note attracted no attention outside the field. This account is for everyone else. The journal begins on the 23rd of March, 1754. March the 23rd, 1754. I have today received from the office of the Director of Works the final approved plan for the ventilation shaft installation in the district of the Old Cathedral, which is the third and largest district of the three in which I have been commissioned to work. The other two, the Merchants' Quarter and the Hospital Ground, having been completed over the preceding 2 years to the satisfaction of the Director and of the Board of Public Health, whose concerns about the miasmatic conditions in the city's subterranean spaces were the origin of the commission. The commission is straightforward in its scope, if not in its execution. The catacombs and crypts beneath Braume were built, as all European cities' underground burial spaces were built, over centuries and without comprehensive planning. Each church and each institution constructing its subterranean space according to its immediate needs and available resources, producing the specific labyrinthine result of 4 centuries of improvised expansion, a network of spaces whose connections are in many places obscure, and whose condition ranges from the structurally sound to the structurally alarming. The public health problem that this produces is well established in the medical literature that Dr. Obrecht of the Board has shared with me. The decomposing organic matter in poorly ventilated subterranean spaces produces gases that rise through the ground and through the foundations of buildings into the living spaces above. And the air so contaminated is a vehicle for the miasmata that produce the epidemic diseases that have visited Braume in alternating years for the last century. The engineering solution is equally well established. Vertical shafts sunk from the surface to the subterranean spaces, connected by horizontal channels to distribute the airflow, producing a system of natural ventilation that draws the contaminated air from the underground spaces and vents it to the surface, diluting the miasmatic concentration to harmless levels before it reaches the inhabited spaces above. I have built this system in 2 districts, and it performs as the theory predicts. The air quality in the buildings above the Merchants' Quarter and the Hospital Ground has been measured by Dr. Obrecht's instruments and found improved. The board is satisfied. The director is satisfied. I am proceeding with the 3rd district. March the 28th, 1754. Today was the first day of the survey in the Cathedral District's subterranean. I descended with 2 survey assistants and a lamp, and the plan of the known underground spaces, which is not a complete plan because nobody has a complete plan of what is below the old cathedral. The plan that exists was assembled from the records of the cathedral chapter, from the records of the 2 religious houses whose crypts adjoin the cathedrals, and from a survey conducted in 1703 that is partial, and that the person who conducted it appears to have abandoned at a certain point without explanation. I noted the point at which the 1703 survey ends. I will return to this. The known spaces are as the records describe them: 3 levels of interconnected crypts beneath the cathedral itself, the deepest of which is at approximately 50 feet below the surface. The oldest stonework I have seen in Braume, Roman in some sections. The specific rough stone construction of the 1st century that you find beneath every major European city if you go deep enough. The 2 adjacent religious houses have their own crypts that connect to the cathedrals at specific points, and the whole forms a space of perhaps half an acre of underground rooms and corridors at varying levels, with the specific complexity of something that has been added to incrementally over many centuries, and that has no overall logic except the logic of available space. The condition is as expected: poor ventilation, the air close and heavy in the lower sections, the specific smell of the badly ventilated underground that Dr. Obrecht describes as the primary vector of the miasmatic contamination. The bones in the lower crypts are in the condition that bones in poorly ventilated spaces reach after long periods, the specific gray-white of old bone in dark damp conditions, less the color of death than the color of very old stone. In the deepest section, below the Roman stonework, below what should be the lowest level of the cathedral's subterranean, there is another space. I did not find it today. I found evidence of it. The 1703 survey's abandonment point is at a section of wall in the deepest Roman-era crypt that shows, on close examination, signs of being a later construction over an earlier opening. The stonework here is 18th-century brick over Roman rubble stone, and the brick is irregular, not the work of a mason following a plan, but the work of someone filling an opening quickly and not concerned about the finish. The 1703 surveyor's notes end with the word hirer and then nothing more. Here, he stopped here. I have noted the location on my survey plan. I have not opened it today. I will need additional equipment for the lower section. April the 2nd, 1754. The wall has been opened. I am writing this in the evening at the drawing table, and I am going to write it precisely because precision is what I have and what I offer against the quality of what today was. The space behind the bricktop opening is a shaft. Not a natural shaft. The sides are too regular, the geometry too exact, the stone lining too deliberate. A constructed shaft, approximately 8 feet in diameter, descending further than my lamp could illuminate in the time available before the lamp's fuel became a concern. I estimate the depth as very significant, greater than the 50 feet of the known subterranean above it, perhaps 80 or 100 feet, possibly more. The shaft is dry, which is unusual at this depth in Braume's geology, and the air in it is moving. There is a current in the shaft, downward, which is against the expectation for a subterranean space of this type, where the natural tendency is for contaminated air to rise. The air is moving downward in this shaft, with the specific deliberateness of a current that has been established by a design. I descended approximately 20 feet into the shaft on a rope, before the lamp's flame indicated that the air composition at that depth was not suitable for extended occupation. I could see, at the point I descended to, the beginning of what I believe are lateral apertures, openings in the shaft's wall at that level, approximately 6 inches in height and 4 inches wide. I could not examine them fully at that visit. I have made detailed notes on the shaft's dimensions and the character of its stonework. The stonework is old, older than Roman. This is my immediate professional assessment, and I hold it with appropriate uncertainty, because the assessment of stone construction age is not my primary expertise. But I have seen Roman stonework and pre-Roman stonework in other contexts, and what lines the walls of this shaft is in the category of very old indeed. I have written to Dr. Obrecht about the shaft. I have also not told the director of works. I am not sure why I have not told the director. I will consider this. April the 5th, 1754. I have told the director. He has asked me to assess whether the shaft can be incorporated into the ventilation system as an additional deep air channel, which would be technically advantageous since the depth would provide a stronger draw on the air above it than the shallower channels of the system I have designed. He has also asked me not to delay the commission's completion on account of the shaft's investigation, which I understand and which I intend to accommodate. Dr. Obrecht has replied with extraordinary interest and has asked to accompany me on a second descent. We have arranged this for next week. In the meantime, I have been studying the shaft's dimensions from my notes, and I have been trying to account for the lateral apertures. The lateral apertures, the side openings in the shaft's wall, are not a feature of any underground construction I am familiar with. A drainage shaft would have no lateral openings because the purpose of a drainage shaft is to carry water downward without lateral loss. A ventilation shaft could have lateral openings to distribute airflow to adjacent spaces, but the openings I saw in the first descent are not positioned or proportioned for this purpose. They are too small, too regular, and at the depth I saw them, too far below any adjacent underground space that would require ventilation. They do not make engineering sense as ventilation features. I have been trying to determine what function they do make sense for. I have been drawing the shaft cross-section, in elevation, with the lateral apertures at their observed positions. I have been drawing this at my table this evening, and I have been extending the drawing downward, projecting the continuation of the shaft and the probable positions of additional apertures below the depth I observed, based on the spacing of the apertures I did see. When I had the drawing at a certain length and looked at it as a complete cross-section, the shaft at its full estimated depth, with the lateral apertures at their regular spacing, the openings at their observed dimensions, I sat back from the drawing table and I looked at what I had drawn. I went to my reference library. I found the volume on acoustics that I maintain because the acoustic properties of enclosed spaces are relevant to civil engineering in ways that practitioners in my field sometimes underestimate. I found the chapter on wind instruments, on flutes specifically, on the relationship between a cylindrical bore, its length, its diameter, and the positioning of the tone holes that the player's fingers open and close to produce the instrument's notes. The lateral apertures in the shaft are tone holes. I have drawn, in the cross-section on my table, a flute. The proportions are not identical to any instrument in my reference volume, but the principle is the same: the specific arrangement of lateral openings at calculated intervals along a cylindrical bore that produces, when air moves through the bore under the correct pressure and velocity, a specific series of pitches. The downward current of air I felt in the shaft is not a thermal anomaly. It is the breath. I have been looking at this drawing for an hour. I have had no training in music, but I understand instrument design as a branch of applied physics. The person who built this shaft knew what they were building. The person who sealed the shaft in 1703 or commissioned the sealing knew what they were covering. I am going to need to understand what the shaft is for before I recommend its incorporation into the ventilation system. An instrument is built to be played. If the shaft is an instrument, the ventilation system will play it. I have not told the director this. I am not sure how to tell the director this. April the 9th, 1754. The second descent with Dr. Obrecht. He was a better companion for the descent than I had anticipated. Medical men who work with epidemic disease have a specific comfort with the unpleasant that makes them useful in underground spaces. And Obrecht additionally has a quality of methodical attention that I recognize as the quality of my own profession, the quality of someone who observes precisely and files the observations without premature interpretation. We descended to 30 feet with better lamps and better rope. At 30 feet, the lateral apertures are clearly visible in the shaft's lining, 4 of them visible at that depth, at intervals of approximately 14 inches, the openings clean-edged and precise in a way that suggests the original construction was of extraordinary quality. The stone at the aperture's edges is the same pre-Roman stone as the shaft's lining. The edges are not weathered. In 400 or however many years since the shaft was constructed, the aperture's edges have not worn. The stone is harder than anything I have worked with. Obrecht measured the apertures with his instruments. He measured the shaft's diameter, which is 8 feet 3 inches, consistent across the depth we descended. He measured the distance between apertures. He was systematic and quiet. When we were back on the surface, he was quiet for longer than I expected, and then he said, "Moorsel, the spacing and the sizing." He said it the way you say a thing when you have arrived at a conclusion and are testing whether the person you are speaking to has arrived at the same conclusion before you say it. I said, "I know," he said. "It is not a ventilation shaft." I said, "No," he said. "What do you intend to do?" I said I intended to complete the survey before making any recommendation. He said, "I am going to look at the 1703 records in more detail." He said, "Someone in 1703 sealed this shaft, and I would like to know what they wrote about it, if they wrote anything." April the 15th, 1754. 3 observations from the period since the last entry. First, I have completed the acoustic analysis of the shaft cross-section as fully as my knowledge permits, which is partially. I know the shaft is designed to produce specific pitches when air moves through it at specific velocities. I know the current I observed in the first descent is the correct velocity for the shaft's lowest register. The downward current at the speed I measured would, by the physics of column and bore acoustics, produce a note whose frequency I have calculated, and that falls in the range of the lowest notes producible by the large organ pipes in the cathedral above. The two facts, which I had not previously connected, are now connected. The shaft is directly below the cathedral nave, directly below the organ loft. Second, the director of works has asked me twice about progress on the shaft survey, and I have told him twice that I am conducting a thorough assessment before making my incorporation recommendation. He has accepted this with the specific patience of a man who is accustomed to engineers being thorough, and who does not yet know what the thoroughness is finding. Third, I have been conducting, in the evenings at the drawing table, an analysis of the full ventilation system I have designed for the cathedral district, using the shaft as a D-pair channel as the director requested. I have been laying the shaft's position on the plan alongside the positions of the 12 ventilation shafts I designed for the district and examining the system as a whole. When I lay out the plan and look at all 13 shaft positions together, the arrangement of them across the district's underground geology, 12 designed by me over the past 4 weeks, and one that was here before I arrived, describes a pattern. I have been looking at this pattern for 3 evenings. I am going to describe it as precisely as I can. The 13 shaft positions plotted on the plan are not random. They are not the positions that an engineer designing a ventilation grid would choose. My 12 designed shafts are not in the positions they appear to be from below in the individual cross-sections. Seen from above, as a plan, the positions of all 13 shafts describe a specific geometric relationship. The 12 I designed follow, in the plan view, a specific spacing and angular relationship to the pre-existing shaft at the center. They are arranged around it, not randomly, not in the grid pattern that efficient ventilation would dictate, in a radial pattern at specific intervals, at distances from the central shaft that are proportional to the central shaft's own internal proportions. The ratio of the distances between my designed shafts to the central shaft corresponds, when I calculate it, to the ratio of the lateral aperture spacings within the central shaft. I have been designing, without knowing I was designing it, an extension of the instrument at the system center. 12 new shafts arranged around one old one. 12 new bores, each with their own specified diameters and depths, and here is the element that I have been examining with the most sustained attention. Their own specified lateral apertures, which I specified in the design documents as cross-ventilation ports for the distribution of airflow through the system, which is what I believed I was specifying. The lateral apertures I specified in my 12 designed shafts are tone holes. I have designed 12 new flutes. I have arranged them around an ancient one. I have been directing this arrangement for 4 weeks, and I have not, until 3 evenings ago, understood what I was directing. I need to understand who or what has been directing me. April the 22nd, 1754. Dr. Albrecht has found the 1703 records. He came to my workshop this morning with a folder from the municipal archive, and he placed it on the drawing table and he said, "Read this." He sat in the corner chair while I read it. The 1703 records contain a survey report, a memorandum, and a sealed addendum. The survey report is routine. It describes the cathedral district's underground spaces in the format of a public health survey, noting the ventilation problems and recommending remediation. The survey was conducted by an engineer named Hartmann, who is not otherwise known to me. The memorandum is from the Director of Works of 1703, a man whose name I do not recognize, to the Board of Public Health. It records that the survey conducted by Hartmann has identified a subterranean feature of unknown origin and unknown purpose that requires sealing for public safety reasons. The memorandum recommends immediate bricking up of the opening to the feature and the discontinuation of the survey at that depth. The memorandum gives no further detail. The sealed addendum is Hartmann's own account of what he found. It was not transmitted to the board. It remained in the folder. Whether it was deliberately withheld or simply not removed when the folder was filed, I cannot determine. It has been in the folder for 51 years. The addendum is 4 pages. I am going to transcribe the relevant sections. Hartmann writes, "The shaft is not of human construction in the sense that I have previously understood that phrase. It is constructed with a precision that the tools and methods of any period I am familiar with could not have achieved. The acoustic properties I have verified by direct experiment. I have generated airflow in the shaft through the use of bellows at the upper opening, and have measured and documented the result, which is a specific combination of tones that the shaft produces at the bellows, several air velocities. The tones are not random. They are not the random resonances that any enclosed space produces when air moves through it. They are arranged intervals, specific pitches in a specific relationship to each other. A chord, a complex and extraordinary chord, sustained and pure in the way that only a precisely designed instrument can produce it." He writes, "I have been in this city for 3 months on this commission, and I have spent 6 weeks in the Subterranean. On the 3rd week I began to hear something in the underground that I attribute, initially, to the acoustic properties of the spaces. Distant sounds, resonances from the surface filtering down through the ground. I tell myself this for 2 weeks. On the 5th week I descend to the shaft. I hear it clearly for the first time, not the surface sounds filtered down, something rising from the shaft, not from the bellows are not in operation, something using the shaft, moving through the shaft producing its tones without my intervention, which means the shaft is being played by something other than my bellows, which means there is a source of directed airflow in the shaft that I have not placed there." He writes, "I have been trying to determine the nature of the source. I am a methodical man. I have measured the airflow. I have calculated the pressure required to produce the tones I observed. The pressure required is significant, not beyond the capacity of natural geological process, of underground gas formation in the spaces below the shaft, but beyond what I can account for by the geology I have surveyed. The geology does not produce this kind of pressure, this kind of directedness. Something is directing the air." He writes, "I went down on the 14th of this month to the deepest point I could reach in the shaft. I had a good lamp and a long rope and a second man on the surface at the rope. I went to 60 feet. At 60 feet, the lateral apertures are all visible from one position. There are 16 apertures that I can see from 60 feet, 8 on each side of the shaft, and they are arranged with a regularity that I find extraordinary. At 60 feet, the temperature in the shaft is warmer than the surface, which is the opposite of the expected gradient, which should produce colder temperatures at depth." He writes, "At 60 feet I became aware that the shaft was not empty below me. I did not see anything. I want to be precise about this. I did not see anything in the shaft below me. What I became aware of was the quality of the air at 60 feet, which was the quality of air in a space that is occupied. not by a human being, by something that displaces air, by something that is the size of the shaft or larger than the shaft, in the section below 60 feet, and that was at 60 feet producing the upward flow of warm air that I felt on my face and hands, and that was the breath of the shafts playing. He writes, I went back to the surface. I wrote this account. I am going to recommend the sealing of the shaft and the discontinuation of the survey at this depth, and I am not going to explain my full reasoning because my full reasoning is not something I can include in a professional document of this kind and have it received as a professional document. The shaft should be sealed. My professional recommendation is that it should remain sealed. Hartmann's addendum ends here. Albrecht from the corner chair said, Well, I said yes. He said, The shaft has been sealed for 51 years, I said, and I have been commissioned to build a ventilation system that will open it. We were quiet for a while. Then Albrecht said, The commission specifies the positions of the shafts you are building. I said, The commission specifies the objectives. The positions are my engineering determination. He said, Are they? I looked at the plan on the drawing table. The 13 shaft positions, the radial arrangement, the proportions that correspond to the central shaft's internal dimensions, the 12 flutes I have designed around the one ancient one. I said, I thought they were. April the 28th, 1754. I have spent 6 days reviewing every decision I have made in the design of the cathedral district's ventilation system. I have examined the site visits, the geological surveys, the soil borings, the measurements. I have traced the development of the shaft positions through the design drafts, looking for the point at which each position was determined and the reason for its determination. Every shaft position has a rational engineering justification. Every single one. The distances, the depths, the specific placement, each one is the correct engineering decision for the objective of ventilating the subterranean spaces of this district. If I were starting the design today without knowing what I know, I would make every decision I have made. And yet the arrangement of the positions, taken together, is not what an engineer designing a ventilation system would produce. The arrangement of the positions is what someone who understood the central shaft's acoustic design and wanted to extend it would produce. The engineering logic and the acoustic logic coincide. Every decision that is correct engineering is also correct acoustics for the purpose of extending the instrument at the center. The two logics are not in conflict. They are the same logic from two different disciplines. I have been thinking about how this is possible. I have arrived at the only answer that accounts for both the engineering correctness of every individual decision and the acoustic coherence of the combined result, which is this. Whatever is in the deep shaft has been in the deep shaft long enough to understand the city above it. It has been in the deep shaft long enough to understand what a city's subterranean spaces need, in the form of public health engineering, in the period when the city is Braume in 1754. It has known that eventually someone would be commissioned to ventilate the cathedral district. It has known what an engineer who understands Enlightenment-era public health theory and applied hydraulics and the physics of column ventilation would determine to be the correct shaft positions for the district's ventilation needs. And those positions, for the city's specific underground geometry, are the positions that extend the instrument. It has been waiting for the city to need the engineering that would build what it needed built. It has been patient in the way that something which has been in the same shaft for longer than the city above it has existed can be patient. It did not direct my hand. It arranged the conditions so that my hand, directed by nothing but good engineering practice, would draw what it needed drawn. I have been its instrument. My competence was its instrument. May the 3rd, 1754. I have met with the director of works this morning. I told him the shaft survey has revealed a pre-existing subterranean feature of archaeological significance whose structural integration with the proposed ventilation system requires careful assessment. I told him I am recommending a modification to the ventilation design that will route the system around the feature rather than through it. I told him this will require repositioning 3 of the 12 designed shafts, which will extend the commission by approximately 6 weeks. He asked what the feature was. I said it was a shaft of pre-Roman construction whose structural integrity could not be guaranteed under the loads the ventilation system would place on the surrounding geology. I said this is not a lie technically, though it is not the truth. He said he would want to inspect the feature before approving the redesign. I said of course. I said I would arrange the inspection. I need to redesign the system before the inspection. I need to produce a ventilation design for the cathedral district that does not extend the instrument. The 3 repositioned shafts need to be positions that are acoustically wrong for the purpose while remaining correct for ventilation. This is a more difficult engineering problem than the original design, because the positions that are acoustically wrong tend to be positions that are also less efficient for ventilation, and the director's engineers will check the design. I have been at the drawing table for 3 days. I am looking for positions that ventilate the district correctly without completing the harmonic arrangement around the central shaft. Every position I try that is acoustically wrong is also, in some measure, ventilation wrong. The city's geology is producing the same coincidence of correct positions that produced the original design. The city's geology, and whatever has arranged the city's geology over the centuries it has been patient in, is not going to give me an easy solution. May the 10th, 1754. I have found the solution, or something close enough to a solution that the director's inspection should not reveal the compromise. It has cost me a week, and it will cost the commission 6 weeks of extension, and it has required me to understand the acoustic physics of the instrument at a level I did not have 2 weeks ago, and that I have had to acquire from the reference volumes on acoustics in my library and from Dr. Albrecht, who has a background in natural philosophy that includes physics, and who has been the most useful collaborator I could have in a situation he finds as professionally unusual as I find it. The repositioned shafts will ventilate the district. They will not complete the harmonic arrangement. They will produce, when the system is operating, a partial resonance in the central shaft. Some airflow will reach it through the connecting channels, but the partial resonance will not produce the full chord that Hartmann measured and that the complete arrangement would produce. It will produce something, not everything. Whether something is enough for what is in the shaft, I do not know. I do not know what it wants the instrument for. I do not know what it does when the instrument is played. Hartmann's addendum does not address this. Hartmann stopped at the description of what the shaft was and recommended its sealing without speculating about the purpose. He was a methodical man, and methodical men recommend the engineering response and leave the philosophical question to others. I am less methodical than Hartmann, or more reckless, or simply in possession of 51 additional years of the city above the shaft, continuing to develop in ways that make the philosophical question impossible to entirely separate from the engineering one. The city above the shaft has been building itself for centuries over something that has been in the ground below it for longer. The city's dead are in the spaces above the shaft. The city's living are in the spaces above that. Whatever the instrument is for, whatever it produces when played, whatever receives its output, whatever in or below or through the shaft is its audience. It has been patient enough to wait for the exact conditions that would cause a competent engineer to build what it needed. It is not in a hurry. It is not threatening. It has simply arranged the circumstances and waited for the right person. I am, apparently, the right person. The wrong right person, as it turns out, because the right person would have built the design without reviewing the arrangement and would have completed the instrument. But I am not the right person. I am the person who looked at the plan and saw the pattern before I put the last 3 shafts in the ground, and I am the person who has spent 3 weeks finding a way to not complete what was almost completed. It is possible that the next engineer they hire will complete it. It is possible that the director will commission another survey in 50 years, and the next Hartmann will recommend sealing again. It is possible that the shaft will be sealed and opened and sealed and opened, one engineer at a time, until the city's needs and the shaft's needs coincide completely, and the chord sounds. I do not know what the chord sounds. I would like to not find out by having built it. May the 18th, 1754. The director inspected the site yesterday. He is satisfied with the modified design. He has approved the 6-week extension. He has noted the pre-existing shaft in the inspection report as an archaeological feature requiring protective designation, which I suggested to him, and which he accepted readily because protective designation is the bureaucratic mechanism that allows a civic official to not deal with something without appearing to ignore it. The shaft will be resealed. The modern brick will be more thorough than the 1703 brick. I have specified it in the design documentation. I am going to make one more descent before the resealing. I am going to go to the depth Hartmann went to. I am going to see what is at 60 feet. I am not sure this is a wise decision. I am sure it is the decision I am going to make. May the 20th, 1754. I went to 60 feet. The lamp held. The rope held. Albrecht was on the surface at the rope. I went at midday, when the city above is at its most active. The commerce, the carts, the church bells of noon, the entire living weight of a city going about the specific business of being alive. Because I wanted the noise of the living above me while I was in the shaft, and I cannot fully account for why I wanted this, except that the noise of the living seemed like an appropriate companion for the visit. The lateral apertures are as Hartmann described. 16 of them, 8 to each side, precisely arranged, the edges not worn. The warmth at 60 feet is as Hartmann described, warmer than the surface, the specific warmth that rises from something living rather than the geological warmth of the deep earth, which is a different quality of warm. Below 60 feet in the darkness below the lamp's reach, there was airflow, upward from below, steady, not strong, not the pressure of a gust or a bellows, the even, continuous, specific airflow of respiration. I held the lamp so its flame showed the direction of the airflow. The flame bent upward toward me, toward the surface. The warmth came with it. I did not hear anything. I want to be precise about this because Hartmann was precise about it. I did not see anything. I did not hear anything. What I became aware of at 60 feet in the warmth of the upward air was the quality of the shaft, the specific quality of a space that is occupied, not by something that meant me harm, not by something that was attending to me in the way that a predator attends to prey. The quality of the space was the quality of something that was aware of my presence without finding it significant. The quality of something very old that has been in one place for a very long time, and that registers the presence of a person the way you register the presence of a bird at the window. Noted, not important, not something that changes what you are doing. I was not important to it. I was not important to it at all, and this was the most peaceful and the most terrible thing about the 60 feet, because if I had been important to it, I would have had the specific weight of its attention, which would have been frightening in the way of frightening things, and I would have had something to do in response to the frightening. The absence of importance was different. The absence of importance was the recognition that I was, from the perspective of whatever was in the deep shaft, the least significant actor in the story I had thought I was at the center of. I had been a tool, not a chosen tool, not a specifically identified tool, just the tool that the city had produced in 1754 when the city needed ventilation engineering. The tool that was available. I went back to the surface. Albrecht asked me what I found. I said, "Nothing I can describe in a professional document." He nodded. He had expected this answer. He said, "Are you going to write it in the private journal you have been keeping?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Keep it somewhere it will be found." He said, "It seems to me that the city should know what is below it, not so that anything different is done about it. The sealing is the right engineering response and will remain the right engineering response for the foreseeable future. But because the record should exist, because the next engineer should have the Hartmann addendum and the Moorsel Journal both, rather than only the Hartmann addendum, and the next engineer after that should have all three," he said. Whatever is in the shaft is patient. It will arrange conditions again. The arrangement will be built by someone. When that person reviews the records, they should have more to review than we had. I said, "You are confident the records will survive?" He said, "The municipality archives everything." He said, "The worst thing that can happen to this journal in the Braume Municipal Archive is that it is catalogued as miscellaneous technical documents and left unfiled for 50 years. He said this, and I wrote the journal, and I placed it in the folder between the Eastern Drainage Survey and the North Gate Foundation report. And I filed it in the folder in the Department of Civil Works, and I went home, and I completed the commission. The commission was completed in August of 1754. The pre-existing shaft was resealed in June of 1754, with modern brick, and with mortar of a quality that the 1703 sealing had not achieved, and the ventilation system was completed around it in the arrangement that Pieter van Moorsel had modified to avoid the acoustic completion that the original arrangement would have produced. Van Moorsel left Braume in 1755. He returned to the Netherlands. He completed several subsequent commissions in Amsterdam and Rotterdam before his death in 1778. His professional records in the Dutch municipal archives show him as a competent and well-regarded civil engineer of the Enlightenment period, whose primary area of specialization was subterranean drainage and ventilation. There is no further mention of the Cathedral District Commission in any of his professional records. The ventilation system he built in Braume functioned as designed for approximately 40 years, until the expansion of the city's population and the corresponding growth of the subterranean infrastructure produced the need for a new survey and a new commission. The new commission was awarded in 1798 to an engineer whose name appears in the municipal records and whose professional documents are in the Braume archive, whose professional documents include a journal, whose journal begins on the 14th of April 1798 with the sentence, "I have today received from the office of the Director of Works the final approved plan for the ventilation shaft installation in the district of the Old Cathedral, which requires significant expansion of the existing system due to the growth of the subterranean infrastructure over the past 4 decades. The 1798 journal was found in the same folder as the Moorsel Journal and the Hartmann Addendum. It was catalogued as one item among the 14 documents in the folder. It was listed as Technical Diary, Unknown Hand, approximately 1798. The 1798 engineer found the Hartmann Addendum. The municipal archive had kept it. The 1798 engineer found the Moorsel Journal. The municipal archive had kept that too. The 1798 engineer read both documents before beginning the survey. What the 1798 engineer did with the information is documented in the 1798 journal, which the researcher found in 2021 in the same folder as the Hartmann Addendum and the Moorsel Journal, in which this account has not transcribed. Because the 1798 journal is the longest of the 3, and the researcher's 2022 note in the Specialist Journal of Civil Engineering History listed all 3 documents and noted that the 1798 journal was of particular interest. And someone reading this account who wishes to know what the 1798 engineer decided to do should find the Specialist Journal. What can be said is this. The Braume Cathedral is still standing. The subterranean spaces beneath the old cathedral district were surveyed in 1952 as part of a post-war reconstruction assessment. The survey found the ventilation system installed in 1754 substantially intact. The survey found, at the deepest point of the survey, a section of wall that showed evidence of repeated bricking up and repeated opening, the specific layered masonry of a wall that has been constructed and demolished and constructed again over multiple periods. The 1952 survey did not investigate behind the wall. The survey report notes the wall as a feature of archaeological interest, whose investigation falls outside the scope of the current commission. In the city of Braume, in the archive of the Department of Civil Works, in a folder labeled Miscellaneous Technical Documents, Subterranean Infrastructure, between a survey of the eastern drainage channels and a report on the structural integrity of the North Gate's foundations. There is a folder. The folder contains, among its 14 catalogued items, a journal that begins on March the 23rd, 1754. In the folder behind the journal, there is a journal that begins on April the 14th, 1798. Behind the 1798 journal, there is another document. It was not in the folder when the 1954 catalog was completed. It was not in the folder when the 1998 catalog was completed. It was in the folder when the researcher opened it in 2021. The researcher's 2022 note does not mention the third journal. The researcher did not mention the third journal because the third journal was addressed to the researcher specifically. The researcher's name, in handwriting the researcher could not identify, on the cover of the third journal as the address. The researcher's name and the researcher's institution, and the year 2021. The journal had been waiting in the folder for the researcher's arrival. The journal had been patient. The commission was begun in the spring of 2021, and this account of the Moorsel Journal is one of its products. There are others that this account will not describe, for the same reason that Moorsel did not include certain things in a professional document of this kind. But the record must exist. The record has always been the point. Whatever is in the deep shaft at Braume, whatever has been in that shaft since before the city above it was a city, since before the civilization above it was a civilization, since before the species above it had learned to write the records that accumulate in the folders of the Department of Civil Works between the drainage surveys and the foundation reports. Whatever it is patient. It will arrange the conditions again. When it does, the engineer it finds should have all the records. Here they are.